You may get a little excited when you shop at Burlington.
What a low price! Do you see that? They have my favorite brand! It's like a whole new Burlington! I can buy two!
I'm saving so much!
Burlington saves you up to 60% off other retailers' prices every day. Will it be the low prices or the great brands? Burlington. Deals? Brands? Wow! I told you so. Styles and selections vary by store.
Hey there, travelers. Kaylee Cuoco here. Sorry to interrupt your music, great artist BT Dubs, but wouldn't you rather be there to hear it live? With Priceline, you can get out of your dreams and into your dream concert. They've got millions of travel deals to get you to that festival, gig, rave, sound bath, or sonic experience you've been dreaming of. Download the Priceline app today, and you can save up to 60% off hotels and up to 50% off flights. So don't just dream about that trip. Book it with Priceline.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
You are listening to Women's Running Stories, where exceptional women runners share inspirational stories about their running experiences.
I think my first 5K was in like 2010, 2011 maybe. And then my first half marathon was in 2013. And I really, really trained hard for that. I remember my husband being like, I'll be glad when you're done with this race so I can have my wife back. Little did either one of us know where this was going to go. My name is Becky Croft, and I am an Indigenous woman, athlete, coach. I am certified through the Game Changers program and the RRCA. I am a She Running instructor. I lead a She Runs This Town group, and I am on the board of directors for Renew Earth Running.
Yes, this episode features runner and coach Becky Croft, whose own life experiences have led her to becoming not only a performance-minded runner, but also, in her capacity as a coach, Becky has developed a specialty in guiding runners who are in their menopausal years, including those who, like Becky, have gone through a hysterectomy. But before we hear more from Becky Croft, I want to welcome you to Women's Running Stories. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of this podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I always appreciate you coming and listening to the podcast. And Becky has a really great story to share. Running has served such an important role in her life in so many different ways, which she's going to get into. And because of her own specific, unique experiences, Becky has become a valuable, beloved resource in the running community, sharing her knowledge and her wisdom and her experience. So yes, Becky is a runner and a coach. And like she mentioned, she was certified as a coach through the RRCA, which is the Road Runners Club of America. And she went through that training as part of the Game Changers program. And Game Changers is an organization that supports women of color to become run coaches and also leaders in the running industry. And Becky was one of the first 16 women to go through the Game Changers program back in 2020. The organization continues today. It is thriving. Game Changers is incredible. And if you want a bit more of a backstory about Game Changers, the founder of the organization, Vanessa Peralta Mitchell, was featured on Women's Running Stories back in January of this year, 2025. And I will link to that episode in the show notes. Back to Becky. She also mentioned in that introduction up top there that she's a Chi instructor. And Chi running, if you're not familiar with it, is an approach that combines the principles from Tai Chi with running, and it helps runners to run more fluidly and to be more energy efficient. Becky also mentioned Renew Earth Running, and that organization supports Indigenous sovereignty and environmental stewardship for tribal nations and Indigenous leadership, and the mission is to protect and heal sacred ecosystems. Now, coming up in her story, Becky's going to mention a few other things that I just want to clarify. One is the Running Industry Diversity Coalition, also known as the RIDC. This is an educational nonprofit with a mission to unite the running industry to improve inclusion, visibility, and access for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And Becky is also going to talk about endometriosis because this is, in fact, something she has experienced. And this is a condition where tissue that is similar to the inner lining of the uterus grows outside of the uterus. And among other issues, it can cause tissues and organs to adhere to each other. Endometriosis can be very painful, can also be difficult to treat. And Becky's experience with endometriosis does play into her running story. All right, so let's get to it. Let's hear Becky Croft's running story, which is very much intertwined with her health challenges. Now, here to tell her story, starting at the beginning of her running journey, is Becky Croft.
I was never active in sports in school, in high school, in college, anything like that. I came to running later in life compared to a lot of people. For me, it started out as just a little bit of a way to lose some weight in my 30s. And I mean, looking back, I really didn't have that much to lose, but I was uncomfortable in my body. So I started kind of playing with running a little bit. My best friend had kind of introduced me to it. It was terrible initially because I didn't have any of the right gear, the right clothing, the shoes, all that. So it didn't stick. And like the very first time that I tried, but I kind of kept playing with it a little bit. And then my husband was deployed our first year of marriage, but I had come to running around that time and really had gotten into it. I started with the Couch to 5K app actually. And I was working with a personal trainer and trying to incorporate running into this new fitness routine. And the first time that it threw me into a 90-second run, I was just like, there's no way, I can't do this. But I stuck with the program. I ran the treadmill and then eventually got to the point where I could run for 20 minutes without stopping. And I mean, I just thought that was incredible. So I wound up going to run a 5K with a couple of my friends, this married couple. They were really into running and they were like, hey, come run this 5K with us. It was a little bitty race out at a high school track. And like you went and you ran through a neighborhood and then you came back and you finished on the track. And I was out there in like my yoga pants and my cotton tank top. And I remember being in that last mile of the race, just like fighting for my life. And I was passed first by an older gentleman and then a little kid. And I was like, no, no. And somehow that sparked like this competitive spirit inside of me. But it was like competition with myself. Like, I know I can do this better. And so, I mean, my first 5K was like 35 minutes and some change. It wasn't like terrible, but it wasn't where I thought it could go. So I started like playing around a little more. And next thing I knew, I had run like 24 half marathons. It's funny because you know the saying, looking back, like everything's 2020, and I can now see where running really came into my life where I needed it to. And though I really wish I had run when I was younger to know really where my capabilities were before I hit 30s, 40s, and nearing 50s, it did come to me to help me get through this stage of life. And so my husband and I got married in 2010, and it was 43 days before he deployed. He went to Egypt for an entire year, which was really honestly probably the best thing for our marriage because like we really took all of the physical out of it and were able to connect through video and like learning how to communicate with each other and just better as humans. And so in that time, I had actually come off of birth control in hopes of getting pregnant, us having our own baby. He had a daughter who was about 10 at the time. And so halfway through his deployment, we met up in Italy. He came from Egypt, I came from Oklahoma, and we spent 2 weeks in Rome. And I was like, oh, this would be amazing if I got pregnant in Italy, like kind of our quasi honeymoon. And so I had come off of birth control, but I immediately started having a lot of problems. Now, looking back, I think that these problems had been masked by birth control for the majority of my life. But like nobody really understanding what I was dealing with, even in like the early 2000s, they definitely didn't understand it when I was 15. So when I came off of birth control, I started having a lot of pain, a lot of, really, really big problems with my period. I went to my doctor and I'm like, listen, something's not right here. Can we like try to figure out what's going on? So it was like a year worth of testing of just, well, let's go see if it's this, let's go see if it's that. And it was just, I got to that point where I was like, okay, I've had enough of playing around. Something's seriously wrong. I can't keep living in this pain. And so my doctor agreed to do an exploratory surgery. And so my husband's deployed at this time, and my best friend takes me, and I come out of surgery and to the diagnosis of severe endometriosis, and I've lost my appendix in the process. Like it was stuck to my bladder, and so I didn't really know what to do with that. I had a friend previously who had some endometriosis, was a runner, but like never really talked about it. I didn't understand it, so I started learning more. But I wound up having a second surgery after a couple years. I just had a little bit of relief from that first surgery when they kind of cleared out all the adhesions. And in that second surgery, I came out of it and I had lost my right tube and ovary. And that was also something that I had not expected. And so, I really struggled, but my running was really starting to ramp up. And this was around the time that I was running those half marathons and like racing a lot, trying to get faster, starting to kind of enmesh myself in the running community a little bit in local races and things like that. So I had originally had one surgeon who had done my first couple surgeries. And then just by chance, I was having lunch with a couple of my girlfriends, and one of them opened up and said she had had a surgery. She also had endometriosis, and her doctor had kind of put her through this, what he called temporary menopause, and like with the hopes of her getting pregnant. So I was like, tell me more about this doctor that you're working with. And so I wound up going to see him, and he put me through my third surgery. At that point, I had already lost the right tube and ovary, lost my appendix, but he had a different method. So I went into surgery with him, and at that point, my uterus was growing together. And rather than it being like this egg shape, it was like almost like a heart shape where it was growing in the middle together. And so he clipped that. He cleaned out some more adhesions. He put me through the temporary menopause. But it was such a very brief period of time where I had relief compared to the other surgeries that I, at that point, was like, listen, 6.5 years in, I've been through a lot. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Please just take my uterus out. And he literally laughed in my face and said, I know this is what you think you want right now, but I can't put a uterus back in if I take it out. And I like lunged towards him, and my husband was like, whoa, 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 no, 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 we're done here. But I was just like, infuriated that somebody would speak to me like this. I was 38 at the time, and I had been through the majority of my 30s with this problem. And so I went back to my previous surgeon and I was like, okay, here's what I've been through and I'm done. And can we talk about a hysterectomy? And he was like, yeah, you've been through enough, but I'm not doing surgery now. But let me refer you to someone in our same clinic, and she is doing surgery. And so I sat down with her and I explained everything. She was like, yeah, you've been through enough. Let's do this. And so I went in and had the hysterectomy. in between race cycles. And in that season, I was racing half marathons every weekend, and I was like crossing the finish line with my fake smile for the photographer, but I was bursting into tears because like I was really trying to break 2.5, and I was just getting a little bit further away from it. Or even if I had PRs, like I couldn't celebrate them. I was just so emotionally damaged from all the things that I had been through. But I literally scheduled my hysterectomy in between half marathons. I was like, I'm going to finish this one up. I'm going to go have this surgery, and then we're going on. And so I raced a 10K 3 weeks after my hysterectomy, which I should not have done. Running really became my therapy through all that. And for me at that point, it was very vulnerable to speak about what I was going through. Very uncomfortable. Nobody really wants to talk about periods, period pain, things like that. And I had never been the girl that like had debilitating cramps or anything like that. So this was all really new physical experiences for me. Most of my friends and family didn't really know what was going on with me. They just kind of saw like I had been in the hospital, but didn't really know why. I wasn't really talking about it, but running was the vehicle that was moving me through this experience. And coming out of that on the other side, now I understand that running does physically mimic like EMDR therapy in a lot of ways. And it's because I've now had a therapist who is also a runner, who has also had a hysterectomy, who couldn't have her own babies, who I really relate to in so many ways. But she was like, no, Becky, it really is like a physical form of therapy. And I'm like, okay, good. So now I can understand that like all of those things that I was struggling with, I was working through some of those on my own on the run. Because even though I've got a husband, he's a dude, he's an RN, so he understands some of like the biology behind some of these things, but he's never going to have this firsthand experience in my body. So he couldn't fully connect to that. And so I could kind of explain some things to him, but he was kind of like, I don't know what to do here. So running was doing a lot of heavy lifting for me. So being a runner throughout this process is probably really what has led me to becoming the resource that I am. Like I said, I scheduled my hysterectomy in between race cycles and things like that. But as I was choosing the hysterectomy and approaching it, I was doing a lot of research. And so this was in 2016. We didn't have the resources that we have now. And every Google search that I did led back to the Hyster Sisters site because it's really the only resource that anyone had as far as hysterectomy was concerned. But none of it was catered towards athletes. And like I said, I didn't have a long history with running. I came to this later in life. And so I didn't have Boston qualifying times. I didn't know what I was capable of, but I wanted to find out. And I was still very much in that mindset of, let's just prove everybody wrong and see what can happen here. So I got frustrated with reading about, oh, yeah, you can go jogging after your hysterectomy. And like, it was just all about get some gentle movement in, and that's not me. So I kind of got to this point, and this was through the period where I'm really healing a lot emotionally, physically, and gearing up towards getting hormones that I was like, okay, I feel like a unicorn out here, and not in some beautiful, sparkly, magical way, but like, what the hell? I can't be the only woman out here trying to Boston qualify after a hysterectomy. So I had to educate myself a lot and experiment and actually get out of my comfort zone and start speaking about my experience. And so I had previously like worked in, a 7 to 4 job, really. I wasn't even a 9 to 5 girl, but I had been in accounting and payroll and administration, things like that for most of my career. And I going through all of this was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I worked in a machine shop with nothing but dudes, and I was kind of like their mom, and my boss just was not understanding what I was going through. And so I finally just got fed up one day and I walked out after like, 6 or 7 years of working there. And I truly loved it. Like I I thrive in environments like that, but at the same time, I was really just struggling to stay alive day to day. So I couldn't do it anymore. And then shortly thereafter, our house wound up burning down, and it was kind of like the door that opened towards like, okay, here's the thing, you've got to go do it. And my chiropractor had kind of planted the seed of, we need a new chi running instructor because ours had moved off into the Northeast area. We didn't have one anywhere in the tri-state area. And he was like, I think it needs to be you. And I was like, I mean, I've been practicing chi on my own for a long time, putting this all together, but I don't know that I can teach it. And he's like, you can do it. So as like my entire life has completely changed, I was like, okay, well, let's just do it. Let's just see what happens. So I created my Instagram account and started kind of stepping into that role as a coach. I got my Chi certification, and then I was kind of like, I don't know if I necessarily need to have a running coach certification. It might be nice to have one to kind of put some weight behind my name. Then Vanessa came along, and this opportunity to get certified, because dropping $350 on a certification also is not just something like you have a lot of confidence in doing initially. So it wasn't even a full program yet, but I was one of the first 16 to be able to go through this program for BIPOC women who wanted to be coaches and change the narrative of like who is an expert in the industry, because it's primarily white men. And so that really, I'm sure that I was led to wait for that opportunity for a reason, because that's really been impactful for me becoming a coach and becoming the resource for masters and menopausal athletes that I am. And I never really thought like, oh, I want to be a coach when I grow up, or I want to be able to do this or that. I stepped into this just because I didn't see anyone like me in the running industry, and there was nobody speaking to me. I mean, I had a coach and I loved her, and the coaching umbrella that she was under was great, but like they were all going after sub threes in the marathon. And I'm like, could you just get me to a sub four? That'd be great. Yes. So, as I mentioned, I am Indigenous. I represent the Cherokee and the Yakima nations. And so, through building my own platform, I eventually found Native Women Running, which is now Native Women Run. And I was like, oh, wow, I've never really had strong ties to my Native community because I was a product of the late 70s. So, all of that was really stripped away from me. From the very beginning, I've never had ties to my culture, my language, my tribes, anything like that. But I started seeing women who looked a little more like me and seeing that they were runners. And that kind of opened up something else in me that had lied dormant for a long time. And eventually starting to build a relationship with Verna, the founder, allowed me to grow even more in that community. And then that eventually led to me finding Renew Earth Running and kind of unofficially becoming the coach of a lot of their athletes, just because there are not a lot of Native coaches out there, especially women. So I've had opportunities to donate running plans, to build relationships with different athletes in those communities. And now that has led me to actually being one of the board members for Renew Earth Running. That has also kind of overlapped with the Running Industry Diversity Coalition. And then again, our Game Changers programs, like all of these different communities have overlap in DEI and representation and running beyond races and paces. And running for most Indigenous peoples goes back to time immemorial. Like they used running as ceremony, and it was much more than just going out there and Boston qualifying or getting a medal. Just being surrounded by more Indigenous peoples and watching their connection to their cultures, their traditions, and learning more about different tribes, it has helped me decolonize them and expand my mindset around the way that I've been conditioned. I'm still growing through a lot of that, but it's definitely made me a better version of myself, a better human, a better coach. I mean, it's led to some great opportunities as well. Verna and the leadership team of NWR asked me to run Boston last year because Verna got an unexpected second bib, but it was about 6 weeks before the race. So I came right out of a marathon cycle. It was actually a goal marathon cycle for me in February at Ventura. And then I was halfway through my deload and she called me and she was like, or she texted me, she was like, "Can we have a conversation? Can you call me?" And I was like, "What is going on?" So I called her and she offered it to me. And I was just honestly so shocked. I had no idea that like this opportunity would pop up. And I was like, well, let me ask my husband, first of all. The man who thought I would run one half marathon and be done. Here I am training for, possibly marathon number 8 in between Ventura. And then I got the lottery spot for Chicago. So I wound up running 3 marathons last year, but Boston was the most impactful for me because Verna actually had connected with the granddaughter of Tarzan Brown. And not a lot of people understand that Heartbreak Hill is actually named after Tarzan Brown. He was Indigenous and he beat John Kelly on the course. They were actually friends. So they were playing cat and mouse through the marathon and they came up on the hill, that last famous hill. And so John was kind of beating him and he patted Tarzan on the back. He's like, "Don't worry, I've got this." And Tarzan was like, "Oh, no, hell no, you don't." And took off and beat him. So the media spun it into, oh, he broke John Kelly's heart. But everybody thinks that it's just, oh, because it's such a terrible hill at the end of the race. No, it was actually named after an Indigenous athlete. But being able to meet his granddaughter and listen to the stories that she told allowed me to go into that race and think about the fact that me and one other woman from NWR were there. And we were maybe one of, I don't know, a dozen or so Native athletes on the course. So it was really special for me. And I took Heartbreak Hill, I walked it, and I spent some time in meditation thinking about how I was following in the footsteps of Tarzan Brown. It was really cool. I've always been the runner who pushed really hard and beat herself up and really set unnecessary timelines or deadlines as far as when I needed to hit these goals. But over the course of the last handful of years and being an athlete in surgical menopause, learning how to tweak my training to make it work better for me, this is where I've really embraced training more efficiently and not forcing myself through, like beating myself up to get there. And that's really entailed like working on my running form to make it more efficient, working with gravity rather than against it. But also like during a marathon cycle, like I know that I've got my plan set in place. I've finally embraced strength training after all these years. Like I've gotten in a really good groove with that. So there may be a cycle where I really dial that in. The next cycle, I may really dial in nutrition. And I see how each one of those components impacts my running. And then I can put it together so that I have really a strong experience, but really enjoy it at the same time.
Really enjoy it at the same time. I hear that. Enjoying ourselves in running. Sometimes I feel like I get so caught up in training and paces and times that I can lose sight of the joy of it all. And I do like that refocus, coming back to enjoying running. And that does bring us to the end of Becky Croft's running story on the podcast. Thank you so much, Becky, for coming on and sharing your story. Good luck in everything you have coming up. I wish you the very, very best. And thank you so much for all that you do in the running world. And if you, like me, want to continue to follow Becky, look to the show notes. I will have a link to her Instagram account so you can keep up with what she is doing. I will also link to the many organizations that have been mentioned in this episode. And thank you so much for coming here and listening. That does bring us to the end of this episode. That is going to do it for me. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I'm the host and producer of Women's Running Stories. And until next week, I wish you healthy, very, very joyful strides forward. Women's Running. Women's Running Stories.